Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rashmi Jain, Assistant Professor, Department of Social Work, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Today I shall be talking about PRA as a tool for community engagement. Through this module, the students will be able to understand the following. They will be able to understand the genesis and evolution of PRA as a tool for community engagement. Number 2, understand the principles of PRA. Number 3, to know about some techniques of PRA for community engagement. The last few decades have witnessed more shifts in the rhetoric of rural development than in its practice. These shifts include the now familiar reversals from top down to bottom up, from centralized standardization to local diversity, and from blueprint to learning processes. Linked with these, there have also been some beginnings of changes in modes of learning. The move here is away from extractive survey questionnaires and towards participatory appraisal and analysis, in which more and more the activities previously appropriated by outsiders are instead carried out by local, rural or urban people themselves. In these changes, a part has been played by two closely related families of approaches and methods, often referred to as Rapid Rural Appraisal or RRA, which spread in the 1980s, and its further evolution into Participatory Rural Appraisal PRA, which came about fast and began to spread in the 1990s. In the mid-80s, the word participation and participatory entered the RRA vocabulary. They already had a long history of rural development. For some years in the 1970s and early 80s, under the leadership of Norman Uphoff and others, Cornell University published the Rural Development Participation Review until USAID terminated its support, and participation was a recurrent theme in the contributions to Michael Cerner's book edited by the World Bank, which was called Putting People First, which drew on the experiences from early years. In 1988, in India, the Aga Khan Rural Support Program was interested in developing participatory RRA, which is Rapid Rural Appraisal, and invited IIED to help. Jennifer McCrane carried out a 4-week consultancy with AKRSP in Gujarat in September and October 1988, during which participatory rapid rural appraisals were conducted by and with villagers and AKRSP staff in 2 villages. Now, if we come to the definition of PRA, what is PRA? It has been questioned whether it is useful to define PRA as separate from RRA. One view is that labels do not matter. There is a plethora of labels for approaches and methods of learning about rural life and conditions. Many of the sets of practices overlap. There is continuous innovation, sharing and exchange. In this view, the only importance of a label is a sense of pride of ownership and originality with which it gives, so strengthening commitment, enthusiasm and good work among its practitioners. Otherwise, there would be no point in defining an exclusive territory of activities for PRA or any other set of approaches or methods. The opposite view is that good PRA often implies radical personal and institutional change, and that the term should be debased by being used for anything less than this. Moreover, with PRA becoming fashionable, many will label and relabel their work PRA, though when in fact it is still extractive rather than participatory, and when their behavior and attitudes are unchanged. A balanced view may be that since we are concerned here with static terms like RRA and PRA for combinations and fluxes of activities which are far from static and which take different forms in different places, labels can help to define what belongs where. This may serve to encourage better performance. PRA has been called an approach and method for learning about rural life and conditions from, with and by rural people. The prepositions have sometimes been reversed in order to read by, with and from. PRA is, though, more than just learning. It extends to analysis, planning and action. PRA as a term is also used to describe a variety of approaches. To cover these, a recent description is that PRA is a family of approaches and methods to enable rural people to share, enhance and analyze their knowledge of life and conditions, to plan and to act. PRA as it exists in the early 1990s has evolved from, draws on and resonates with several sources and traditions. Some of its methods do appear to be new, but some have been rediscoveries. Pelto and Rhodes in 1990 have worked on these. In addition, what has happened is that it makes no sense to try to separate out causes, effects and innovations, influences and diffusion as though they follow straight lines. In a world of continuously quicker and closer communication, transfers and sharing have become more and more rapid and untraceable. The philosophy, approaches and methods known as rapid rural appraisal began to emerge in the late 1970s. Workshops held at the IDS on rural development tourism, indigenous technical knowledge and RRA itself were only some among the parallel moves in different parts of the world in search of better ways for outsiders to learn about rural life and conditions. RRA can be seen to have three main origins. The first was dissatisfaction with the biases, especially the anti-poverty biases of rural development tourism, the phenomenon of brief rural visits by the urban-based professionals. These biases were recognized as spatial, visits near cities on roadsides and to the centers of villages to the neglect of peripheries. Project, where projects were being undertaken often with special official attention and support. And person, meeting men more than women, elites more than the poor, and users more than the non-users of services and so on. The users more than the non-users of services and so on. Seasonal, going in the dry and cool rather than hot and wet seasons, which are often worse for poor rural population. And diplomatic, which is where the outsider does not wish to cause offense by asking to meet poor people or see bad conditions. All these could combine to hide the worst poverty and deprivation. The second origin of RRA was disillusionment with the normal processes of questionnaire surveys and their results. Again and again over many years and in many places, the experience had been that questionnaire surveys tended to be long drawn, tedious and a headache to administer. It was also a nightmare to process and write up, inaccurate and unreliable in data obtained leading to reports if any, which were long, late, boring, misleading, difficult to use and anyway ignored. The third origin was more positive. More cost-effective methods of learning were sought. This was helped by the growing recognition of development professionals to the painfully obvious fact that rural people were themselves knowledgeable on many subjects which touched their lives. Towards the end of the 1970s, though, most of those professionals who were inventing and using methods which were quicker and more cost-effective were respectable questionnaire surveys, were reluctant to write about what they did, fearing for their professional credibility. They felt compelled to conform to standard statistical norms, however costly and crude their applications, and obliged in their reports and publications to use conventional methods, categories and measures. In the 1980s, in some places, the situation was transformed. The family of approaches and methods known as rapid rural appraisal or RRA gained increasing acceptance. It began to be seen that it had its own principles and rigor. In the early 1980s, RRA was argued to be cost effective, especially for gaining timely information, but still with some sense that it might only be a second best. By the mid-1980s, the RRA approaches and methods, when properly conducted, were more and more eliciting a range and quality of information and insights inaccessible through modern traditional methods. Except when rushed and non-self-critical, RRA came out better by criteria of cost-effectiveness, validity and reliability as compared to more conventional methods. Now, an early attempt to list countries where RRA had been developed identified 12 in Africa, 8 in South and Southeast Asia, 3 in Latin America, 3 in Australia and the Pacific and 1 in Europe. In the mid-1980s, the word participation and participatory entered the RRA vocabulary. They already had a long history in the rural development. It was in the year 1985 Concave International Conference that participation began, albeit modestly, to be used in connection with RRA. Discussions at the conference generated a typology of 7 types of RRA, of which participatory RRA was one. For this, the dominant purpose was seen as stimulating community awareness with the outsider's role as catalyst. Later in 1988, participatory RRAs were listed by the IIED team as one of the 4 classes of RRA methodologies, the other being exploratory RRAs, topical RRAs and monitoring RRAs. In 1988, there were parallel developments in Kenya and India. In Kenya, the National Environment Secretariat, in association with Clark University, conducted an RRA in one of their districts, which led to the adoption in September of a village resource management plan. This was subsequently described as participatory rural appraisal and the method outlined in 2 handbooks. Around the same time, in 1988, the Aga Khan Rural Support Program was interested in developing participatory RRA and invited IIED to help. In different ways, both the Kenya and India experiences were seminal in understanding and for the development of PRA. Subsequently, there was an explosion of innovation in India, especially not only in the NGO sector, but in other sectors as well. At the same time, cross-fertilization and spread took place internationally. A brief definition of PRA is an approach used by non-governmental organizations and other agencies involved in international development. The approach aims to incorporate the knowledge and opinions of rural people in the planning and management of development projects and programs. Now we will understand the principles of PRA. For both RRA and PRA, good performance requires that practitioners and facilitators follow basic principles. Some are fully shared and some have been additionally emphasized in PRA. The principles shared by PRA and RRA is, the first one is reversal of learning. That is, to learn from rural people directly on the site and face to face, gaining from local physical, technical and social knowledge. Second is learning rapidly and progressively. With conscious exploration, flexible use of methods, opportunism, improvisation, iteration and cross-checking, not following a blueprint program but being adaptable in a learning process. Third one is offsetting biases, especially those of rural development tourism, by being relaxed and not rushing, listening, not lecturing, probing instead of passing on to the next topic, being unimposing instead of important, and seeking out the poorer people and women and learning their concerns and priorities. Next is optimizing trade-offs, relating the cost of learning to the useful truth of information with trade-offs between quantity, relevance, accuracy and timelessness. This includes the principle of optimal ignorance, knowing what is not worth knowing and of appropriate imprecision, not measuring more than needed. As Keynes has reputed to have said, it is better to be approximately right than precisely wrong. Next is triangulation, meaning using a range, sometimes 3 of the methods, types of information, investigators or disciplines to cross-check. Next is seeking diversity. This has been expressed in terms of seeking variability rather than averages and has been described in Australia as a principle of maximum diversity or maximizing the diversity and richness of information. This can involve sampling in a non-statistical sense. It goes beyond the cross-checking of triangulation. For defined broadly, it deliberately looks for notices and investigates contradictions, anomalies and differentness. Now we will understand some of the principles of PRA. Some of the additional principles of PRA are facilitating, that is, facilitating investigation, analysis, presentation and learning by rural people themselves so that they present and own the outcomes and also learn. This has been expressed as handing over the stick. This often entails an outsider starting a process and then sitting back or walking away and not interviewing or interrupting the whole process. The second additional principle is self-critical awareness and responsibility. meaning that facilitators are continuously examining their behavior and trying to do better. This includes embracing error, welcoming error as an opportunity to learn, to do better, and using one's own best judgment at all times, meaning accepting personal responsibility rather than vesting in a manual or rigid set of rules. Sharing of information and ideas between rural people, between them and facilitators, and between different facilitators, and sharing field camps, training and experiences between different organizations. All these principles are behavioral since they are applied in practice by people doing things. By those, standards by RRA and PRA are more epistemological, while those of PRA are more personal. And this difference indicates the new emphasis placed in PRA on the behavior and attitudes of outsiders in their interactions with rural people, an emphasis which could usefully be part of future RRA as well as PRA. Some of the practical applications are the experiential and anecdotal evidence for the utility of well-conducted RRA and PRA is now massive, but has not been adequately drawn together and analyzed. RRA approaches and methods have been used for appraisal, analysis and research in many subject areas. These include agro-ecosystems, natural resources, forestry, fisheries and the environment, irrigation, technology and innovation, health and nutrition, farming systems and research, marketing, disaster relief, organizational assessment, social, cultural and economic conditions and many special topics. However, most of the applications that we know of can be separated into 4 types of processes: participatory appraisal and planning, participatory implementation, monitoring and evaluation of programs, topic investigations and training and orientation for outsiders and villages. Here I am giving you a glimpse of one of the techniques of PRA, which is a social map. Social mapping is perhaps the most popular method in PRA. For many, in fact, it is synonymous with PRA itself. The focus here is on the depiction of habitation patterns and the nature of housing and social infrastructure, that is, roads, drainage systems, schools, drinking water facilities, etc. Social map is different from other regular maps in significant ways. For one, it is made by local people and not by experts. For another, it is not drawn to scale. It depicts what the local people believe to be relevant and important for them. Thus, it reflects their perception of the social dimensions with their reality with a high degree of authenticity. In spite of there being many overlaps, a social map is different from a resource map. The latter depicts the natural resources, land, water, sources, flora and fauna, etc. In certain cases, though, a map could be a rich combination of the two. This is quite often so in the case of areas having a dispersed settlement pattern. Applications of this social map. The chief feature of a social map is that it is a big help in developing a broad understanding for the various facets of social reality, which is social stratification, demographics, settlement patterns, social infrastructure, etc. The diverse applications of social maps include developing a comprehensive understanding of the physical and social aspects of village life, collecting demographic and other required information from the households, providing a forum of discussion in high to unravel the various aspects of social life, and serving as a monitoring and evaluation tool. We will be talking about one of the techniques of PRA, which is a resource map. Resource map is one of the most commonly used PRA methods next to a social map. While the social map focuses on habitation, community facilities, roads, temples, etc., the resource map focuses on the natural resources in the locality and depicts land, hills, rivers, fields, vegetation, etc. A resource map may cover habitation as well. At times, the distinction between the resource and the social map may get blurred. A resource map in PRA is not drawn to scale. It is not done by experts, but by local people. The local people are considered to have an in-depth knowledge for the surroundings where they have survived for a long time. Hence, the resource map drawn by the local people is considered to be accurate and detailed. It is important to keep in mind, however, that it reflects the people's perception rather than precise measurements to scale. Thus, a resource map reflects how people view their own locality in terms of natural resources. Applications of a resource map. Resource maps have been used for depiction of various aspects related to the natural resource management of a locality, including topography, terrain and slopes, forest, vegetation and tree species, soil type, fertility, erosion and depth, land and land use, common area, tenure, boundaries and ownership, water, water bodies, irrigation sources, rivers and drainages. Watershed development, soil and water conservation measures, denuded areas, etc., agricultural development, cropping patterns, productivity, etc. Resource maps have been found especially useful because they provide a focused spatial structure for discussion and analysis. The next technique is transact walk. Transact is another PRA method used to explore the spatial dimensions of people's realities. It has been popularly used for natural resource management. It provides a cross-sectional representation of the different agroecological zones and their comparison against certain parameters including topography, land type, land use, ownership, access, soil type, soil fertility, vegetation, crops, problems, opportunities and solutions. Though natural resources remain the focus of any transact, this does not mean that there is no place for the depiction of social aspects. Various social aspects, for example, the caste and ethnic determinants of a settlement, access and control, and gender-related dimensions are captured in detail depending upon the objectives of the exercise. A transact is different from a resource map despite areas of overlap. The resource map provides a bird's eye view of the locality with a focus of natural resources. In transact, however, it depicts a cross-sectional view of the different agroecological zones and provides a comparative assessment of the zones of different parameters. It is generally done after a resource map and therefore helps in triangulation. It also helps in taking forward the process of problem identification and planning for the development of the natural resources in the area. Application of transacts. Transacts have been used for various purposes, including appraisal of natural resources in terms of status problems and potential, verification of issues raised during other PRA exercises, particularly during social mapping, natural resource mapping, etc., planning of various interventions and checking the relevance of the planned interventions, monitoring and evaluation of interventions and projects. The next technique is a timeline. Timeline is an important PRA method quite commonly used to explore the temporal dimensions from historical perspective. Timeline captures the chronology of events as recalled by local people. It is drawn as a sequential aggregate of past events. It thus provides the historical landmarks of a community, individual or institutions. The important points to note here is that it is not history as such, but events of the past as perceived and recalled by the people themselves. The timeline method, in terms of its application, helps to learn from the community what they consider to be important past events, to understand from the community the historical perspectives on current situations, and to generate discussions on changes with respect to issues they are interested in, for example, education, health, food security, gender relations, economic conditions, etc., and to develop a rapport with the villagers, since a discussion about the past of the village can be a good, non-threatening and enjoyable starting point. Next technique is a seasonal map. Seasonal diagram is also called seasonal calendar, seasonal activity profile, and seasonal analysis. Seasonal diagram is one of the most popular PRA method that has been used for temporal analysis across annual cycles with months or seasons as the basic unit of analysis. It reflects the perception of the local people regarding seasonal variations on a wide range of items. Seasonal diagrams, however, are not based on statistics, though they may be triangulated against secondary or primary data in order to verify the information generated. Seasons are an integral part of the people's lives and exert an important impact on the livelihood of the local people, particularly in rural areas. Seasonal diagrams have been used to explore what happens during the year and when. Quantification and depiction of the magnitude of the various activities adds to their utility and richness. Seasonal diagrams help to identify heavy workload periods, periods of relative ease, credit crunch, diseases, food security, wage availability, etc. It has proved to be useful in project planning, especially when to implement various activities. It has been used to identify periods of stress and to plan for when intervention is most required. With a seasonal diagram, it is possible to identify and analyze the livelihood patterns across the year. The major strength of seasonal analysis is that it depicts a range of items and their magnitudes, which helps in understanding how these items are related to and influence one another. These relationships can be quite revealing. There have been some changes that have happened in PRA. Over the years, techniques and tools have been described in a variety of books and newsletters or taught at training courses. However, the field has been criticized for lacking a systematic evidence-based methodology. The basic techniques used include understanding group dynamics through learning contracts, role reversals, feedback sessions, also surveying and sampling, which includes transact walks, wealth ranking and social mapping, interviewing, which includes focus group discussions, semi-structured interviews and triangulation, then community mapping, which includes Venn diagrams, matrix scoring, ecograms and timelines. Now, to ensure that people are not excluded from participation, these techniques avoid writing wherever possible, relying instead on the tools of oral communication and visual communication such as pictures, symbols, physical objects and group memory. Efforts are made in many projects, however, to build a bridge to formal literacy, for example by teaching people how to sign their names or recognize their signatures. Often developing communities are reluctant to permit invasive audiovisual recording. For the purpose of PRA, usually locally available material is used, which includes the branches of trees, which includes stones, which includes mud, which includes anything that can depict what people are trying to express. Now, there have been some developmental changes in PRA. Since the early 21st century, some practitioners have replaced PRA with the standardized model of community-based participatory research, which is CBPR, or with participatory action research, which is PAR. Social survey techniques have also changed during this period, including greater use of information technology such as fuzzy cognitive maps, e-participation, telepresence, social network analysis, topic models, geographic information systems and interactive multimedia. Now, if we summarize the whole module, participatory rural appraisal is an approach used by NGOs, which is non-governmental organizations and other agencies involved in international development. The approach aims to incorporate the knowledge and opinions of rural people in the planning and management of development projects and programs. The philosophical roots of PRA can be traced back to the methods of Paulo Freire and the study clubs of antagonist movements. The process essentially looks at involving rural populations in the conceptualization, planning for and execution of the development points which concern them based on their own priority areas and not on the funder-driven projects and programs that rural populations are subjected to. There are minimal requirements for material and formal education to use this technique. These techniques are also very useful for monitoring and evaluation of projects which have been initiated by international development and aid organizations. Thank you.